Hey there, welcome back to Making of a Podcast. I am Drew Linsalata from Helix Interactive. We are the podcast and audiobook production people, and you can find us right here online at helix-interactive.com. So come check us out and say hello. We'd love to hear from you. In this episode of Making of a Podcast, the series where we walk you through the making of a podcast, we're going to cover the number one most important thing that rarely gets talked about, but is really critical to the success of any new podcast. And that one thing is, what exactly do you have to say? What is your reasoning for wanting to fire up a microphone every week, sit in front of it, and speak into the ether and send your message out there? What is that message? So it's super important, but it's something that tends to get glossed over. Everybody runs right away to the nuts and bolts of microphones and RSS feeds and things of that nature. They forget to sit down and really think about if they have the focus it requires, the commitment, the passion it requires to sit down every week and cover this topic and all its variants again and again and again, especially in the early days of your brand new podcast, where you are starting from scratch and trying to build that initial fan base. You're trying to make that initial connection with an audience. You need that focus. You need to know that this message is important, and you need to have commitment. And the other thing that you need to be able to do is to really kind of clearly identify exactly what the purpose of your podcast is going to be. So here's my topic. That's great. Now, what am I doing with that topic? Am I an educator? Am I an entertainer? Am I just a storyteller? Am I a connector? Do I want to spark conversations? And if so, how am I going to get a conversation going when I'm on one side of a microphone and you're on another and we can't speak to each other? So these are things that you have to kind of think about when you're getting your podcast ready to roll and launching it for the first time. So let's get over to an interview that I did last week via Zoom with our friend and brand ambassador, Mia Voss, where Mia had a lot of good things to say about this particular topic, how she found that focused for her podcast, why this topic is so important to her, why this endeavor is so important to her, why she's passionate about it, and more than anything else, why she has been willing to commit to the first 15 and 20 episodes of this brand new podcast. So let's get to the interview with Mia. I think you're going to enjoy it. It should be pretty enlightening. I'll see you after the interview. We'll talk about what's coming in the next video in the series. Thanks for coming by, and I'll see you in a few minutes.
You know, my whole point of making this whole podcast called Shit We Don't Talk About is exactly that, of things that need aired out, whether that's a popular topic or not. I'm not here for everything to be like a huge, big hit, but to be content to be consumed by the people that need to hear it.
You want a podcast, you don't have one. What do I do? You know, we could talk about microphones and audio interfaces and where to host it and RSS feeds and content calendars and social media and promotion, but that has nothing to do with it until you get this thing down that we're talking about right this second, which is,
Yeah,
what do you have to say and how are
that's
you going to
right.
say it? And are you committed to saying it? And what is your goal? Are you a teacher? Are you an educator? Are you a guide? Are you a conversation starter?
Go with your gut of why you are having these topics. But yeah, you can't get too repetitive or you will see the numbers drop off, but
Yeah.
you also have that higher goal in mind. And then everything you were talking about was semantics.
Know
So
what you
forth.
want to say first before you decide that you want to build a
That's right.
podcast, which, look, you know, given the state of the world and a global pandemic, everybody's writing books and everybody's starting podcasts. So the same rule would apply. You know, if you're going to write a book, you got to have something to write about. Well, if you're going to start a podcast, you got to have something to talk about, something to say
Mhm.
that you feel strongly about saying, that you're committed to, that you're
Right.
going to stay with.
But I got a friend reached out to me this weekend who was talking about podcasting and sent me this whole thing of like, hey, well, do you prefer the guests that have a really big audience or big influence in that whole thing? I was like, I don't give a fuck. Like that's not if I start podcasting because I'm only going by popularity,
Yeah.
I should stop podcasting. That's just my thought on it.
Mm-hmm.
So that I thought it was interesting that what is going to be your goal. And with Shit We Don't Talk About, that was to talk about these topics that may not get that many, like I said, that many listens initially too. So that's something we can talk about as well. Like,
Yeah.
is it the big push or is it going to be that evergreen? And that's one thing I love to do with anything I do in influencer world too.
Right.
I may just do that initial big push, but if I like it, I went to Africa a year ago. I'm still talking about that trip and pushing that out. So why wouldn't I push that out as well of my podcast?
But for now,
Yeah.
before you guys, you know, get serious about like wanting to podcast, think about this stuff. What do you want to talk about? How are you going to talk about it? How long you committed to doing it? And if you don't have an audience right away, are you going to bail immediately or not?
And in the vein and the spirit of the holidays, make that list, check it twice.
Okay, we are back. I think Mia did an excellent job of crystallizing and emphasizing her focus on her message, how she got it, and more than anything else, her commitment to staying true to that message, staying committed to it, staying on message, staying on topic, especially in the early days of a new podcast where you're kind of slogging through, the numbers aren't great, and you're trying to connect to people and build that initial fan base, that initial listener base. I know that this commitment and focus on her message is going to pay off for Mia on the long run. And I know it would pay off for you in the long run too, if you focus on this one issue before getting buried in the technical nuts and bolts of podcasting. So I hope you enjoyed this. In the next episode of the series, we're going to talk about naming your podcast, branding it, getting your logo together, getting a visual identity, positioning it in a very crowded podcast marketplace, and thinking about how you want to be seen when you open the door, let your listeners in, and put yourself out there for the first time. All important things before we get to nuts and bolts issues. So come back next time for that episode. Mia will be there too for that. And if you're liking this, by all means, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the button, tell your friends about us, and come see us at helix-interactive.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you have podcast or audiobook questions, ask them, and we will do the best we can to answer them. See you guys in the next video. We had to stop. We're only people stop in the middle of recording a podcast to take a virtual selfie. It's not really a selfie.
Give that me, yeah.
It